The courtroom was filled with quiet murmurs as people waited for the next case. Judge Reynolds, a stern-looking man in his late 50s, adjusted his glasses and sighed. He had seen all kinds of people in his courtroom, but nothing annoyed him more than what he called kids who think they know better. A young black woman stepped forward. She was wearing a simple dress, her curly hair tied back neatly. She looked calm but slightly nervous. Her name was Maya Carter. The judge barely looked at her as he glanced at the file in front of him. Maya Carter, charged with obstruction of justice. Is that correct? His voice was laced with boredom, as if this was just another routine case. Maya nodded, her posture straight. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds smirked. He had seen this many times before, young people standing before him, thinking they could outsmart the system. He leaned back in his chair. And do you have a lawyer, Miss Carter? Or are you representing yourself? His tone was mocking, almost as if he was daring her to embarrass herself. Maya took a deep breath. I'm representing myself, Your Honor. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. A few people in the back whispered to each other. The judge chuckled and shook his head. You, representing yourself? That's bold. Do you have any legal experience, Miss Carter? Maya's expression remained calm. I have some knowledge of the law, Your Honor. The judge scoffed. I see. Did you pick up a law book once and decide you were a lawyer? The audience chuckled again. He enjoyed moments like this, reminding people that the law wasn't a game. Maya didn't react. She simply stood there waiting. The judge flipped through her file. Tell me, Miss Carter, do you even understand the charges against you? Maya nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The charge is obstruction of justice, but I believe the arresting officer misunderstood the situation. The judge raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what exactly was misunderstood? Maya took a step forward. Your Honor, the officer claimed I interfered with an arrest. But the individual being arrested had already complied, and I was only asking if they had been read their rights. The judge smirked. So you think asking a question makes you a lawyer? Maya remained composed. No, Your Honor. But I do know that every citizen has the right to be informed of their charges and their legal rights upon arrest. A few murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even the prosecutor, a middle-aged man in a gray suit, narrowed his eyes slightly, now paying more attention. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Miss Carter, I have seen many people try to argue their way out of a case. But let me make this clear. You wouldn't last a day in law school. The law is complicated, and you clearly don't understand how this works. Maya finally looked him directly in the eyes. There was something different in her gaze now, something sharp, confident. The judge noticed it, but ignored it, thinking she was just another arrogant kid. A slow smile spread across Maya's lips. With all due respect, Your Honor, are you certain about that? The judge frowned. Excuse me. Maya tilted her head slightly. Are you sure I wouldn't last a day in law school? The room fell silent. There was something about the way she said it, something almost challenging. The judge felt a sudden, unexpected sense of discomfort, though he didn't know why. Before he could respond, Maya continued. Because, Your Honor, I am a lawyer. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. The judge's smirk disappeared. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a bar certification card. The courtroom held its breath. The judge stared at the card, his face turning pale. Maya Carter wasn't just a regular citizen. She was a fully licensed attorney. For a moment, the entire courtroom was frozen. The soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound breaking the silence. Judge Reynolds stared at the bar certification card in Maya's hand, his face unreadable. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. A few people in the audience whispered in hushed tones, their eyes wide with disbelief. Judge Reynolds blinked twice, as if trying to process what he had just heard. Excuse me. His voice had lost its mocking tone. Maya remained calm. She carefully placed the card on the table in front of her. Your Honor, I graduated from Columbia Law School 2 years ago. I passed the bar exam on my first attempt. I am a fully licensed attorney in this state. The judge's fingers drummed against his desk. His expression had changed. There was no amusement now, only irritation and something else. Something like doubt. The prosecutor, a man who had been in countless trials, leaned forward. Miss Carter, if you're a lawyer, why were you involved in an altercation with law enforcement? Maya exhaled slowly. She had expected this question. Because I was trying to prevent an unlawful arrest, she said, her voice steady. I was at a local diner when I saw 2 officers detaining a young man. He wasn't resisting, but they were being aggressive. I simply asked them if he had been informed of his rights. The judge scoffed, though it was weaker than before. And that's why they arrested you? For asking a question? Maya met his gaze. Not just any question. I cited Miranda v. Arizona, 384 U.S. 436. I told them that failure to inform an individual of their rights could be used against them in court. That's when one of the officers told me to mind my business and ordered me to leave. The courtroom listened in stunned silence. The judge clenched his jaw. Maya continued. When I asked again, one officer accused me of interfering with their duties and placed me under arrest. She glanced at the prosecutor. Which, as you know, can't be justified if I was merely speaking. The prosecutor said nothing. He was now fully engaged, no longer dismissing her as some clueless young woman. Judge Reynolds leaned back in his chair. You expect me to believe that trained officers arrested you without cause? Maya didn't flinch. I don't expect you to believe anything, Your Honor. But I do have video evidence. A fresh wave of whispers spread through the room. The judge's eyes darkened. The prosecutor's expression tightened. Maya reached into her bag again, pulling out a USB drive. The entire incident was recorded. Several witnesses at the diner took videos, and one person sent me a copy. Judge Reynolds exhaled sharply. He looked toward the prosecutor. The prosecutor sighed. Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to review this evidence. The judge hesitated. He was losing control of this case, something he despised. But he couldn't outright dismiss a video recording. Fine, he said stiffly. 15-minute recess. As the judge stood and exited the courtroom, Maya turned slightly. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. The same people who had laughed at her earlier were now staring in admiration. But Maya wasn't done yet. Because she knew something the judge and prosecutor didn't. That video would not only clear her name, it would expose a dark secret about the police officers involved. As the judge left the courtroom, the murmurs grew louder. Some people whispered in disbelief, others in awe. Maya sat still, her hands folded neatly on the table waiting. She had played her first move, and now it was time for them to respond. The prosecutor, clearly unsettled, snatched the USB drive and rushed out with his assistant. He knew that if Maya was telling the truth, this case could turn into something much bigger than a simple courtroom hearing. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. When the judge finally returned, his expression was unreadable, but there was tension in the air. The prosecutor followed behind him, his face pale, gripping a stack of printed documents. The judge sat down, adjusted his robe, and cleared his throat. Miss Carter, he said, his voice lower now. We have reviewed your evidence. The courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, the video does, in fact, show Miss Carter speaking calmly to the officers. She does not interfere physically. She is simply asking a legal question. A ripple of gasps echoed in the room. Maya remained expressionless. She already knew this. The prosecutor hesitated before continuing, his voice tighter now. Furthermore, the footage also shows Officer Daniels and Officer Reed. He swallowed, looking toward the judge. They fabricated their report. The courtroom erupted. People whispered, some gasped, and others looked around in disbelief. Maya's eyes sharpened. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Judge Reynolds rubbed his temple. Explain. The prosecutor exhaled slowly. The officers stated in their report that Miss Carter was hostile and uncooperative. They claimed she attempted to obstruct their investigation and became aggressive. He took a deep breath. The video shows otherwise. Miss Carter remained calm throughout the encounter. She asked for the young man's rights to be respected. In response, Officer Daniels became visibly frustrated. He told her to leave, and when she refused, he ordered his partner to arrest her. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. Maya finally spoke. And what about the young man they were arresting? The prosecutor hesitated again. This time, his voice was even lower. The young man in question was never charged. He was released without explanation a few hours later. Maya let his words settle in the air. She turned to the judge, her voice unwavering. So, Your Honor, I ask again, why am I here? Judge Reynolds clenched his jaw. He hated this. He hated being proven wrong in his own courtroom. But he wasn't stupid. The video was damning. The entire case had just crumbled before his eyes. The court will reconvene in 5 minutes, he finally said, standing up abruptly. Bailiff, see that Miss Carter is not restrained. As the judge left, the tension in the room shifted. Maya glanced toward the prosecutor, who now looked less like a confident government official and more like a man scrambling to do damage control. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was about to expose something much bigger than anyone expected. And the judge knew it. The courtroom door slammed shut behind Judge Reynolds, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Everyone sat frozen in place, their minds racing through what had just unfolded. The weight of Maya's evidence hung in the air like an undeniable truth, one that no one, not even the arrogant judge, could ignore. Maya remained seated calm, but her mind was working at lightning speed. She had forced their hand, but the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The prosecutor shuffled his papers, his fingers trembling slightly. He avoided looking at Maya, his confidence from earlier now replaced with uncertainty. He leaned toward his assistant and whispered something, his face tight with frustration. On the other side of the room, the two officers, Daniels and Reed, sat stiffly. They were no longer smirking. Their jaws were clenched, their eyes darting toward the exit as if considering whether they should make a run for it. Maya noticed. Cowards. The 5-minute break felt endless, but when Judge Reynolds returned, the atmosphere had changed. The arrogance in his posture was gone. Instead, he looked cautious, as if he had just realized how deep this situation truly went. He adjusted his robe and cleared his throat. This court is now back in session. Everyone straightened in their seats. Judge Reynolds turned toward the prosecutor. Before we proceed, does the state wish to amend its position? The prosecutor hesitated. His jaw tightened. He had no choice. Yes, Your Honor. He exhaled sharply, his voice forced and controlled. In light of the new evidence, the state will be dropping all charges against Miss Carter immediately. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. A few gasps. Even the bailiffs seemed surprised. Maya didn't react. She had expected this. But she wasn't finished. Judge Reynolds shifted in his seat. Miss Carter, you are free to leave. Maya finally stood, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she turned, slowly, until their sharp gaze landed on Officers Daniels and Reed. I may be free, she said, her voice smooth and unwavering. But this is far from over. The courtroom went silent again. The two officers tensed. Daniels, the taller one, scoffed. This is ridiculous. We did our jobs. Maya tilted her head. Your job. She took a step closer. Is falsifying reports your job? intimidating innocent people, abusing your badge. Judge Reynolds banged his gavel. Miss Carter, this. She turned toward him, eyes cold. Your Honor, if you are truly interested in justice, then you will hear what I have to say. A challenge, right there in front of everyone. The judge's face darkened, but he didn't interrupt again. He knew he had lost control of the room. Maya turned back to the officers. You arrested me on false charges, lied on official reports. But here's the real problem. She paused. How many others have you done this to? A heavy silence filled the room. Officer Reed shifted uncomfortably. Daniels clenched his fists. Maya stepped closer, her voice lowering just enough to make them sweat. Because I guaranteed this isn't the first time. And she was right. She wasn't just exposing them. She was opening a door they never wanted anyone to walk through. Judge Reynolds exhaled sharply and rubbed his forehead. He had no choice. He knew what was coming next. Maya Carter, he said, his voice heavy, if you wish to pursue further action, you may file a motion against the officers involved. Maya smirked. Oh, Your Honor, she said smoothly. I already have. A ripple of shock spread through the room. This wasn't just a fight for herself. This was about justice, for every person these officers had wronged before. And Maya Carter wasn't backing down. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Maya Carter stood tall, her sharp gaze locked onto the two officers who had once believed they held all the power. But now the balance had shifted. The weight of truth pressed down on the room, suffocating those who had built their careers on deception. Judge Reynolds rubbed his temples, frustration clear on his face. He had underestimated her. Everyone had. But now, there was no escaping what came next. Officer Daniels, the taller of the two, scoffed, masking his unease. This is insane, he muttered under his breath. She's just a kid. Maya's lips curled into a smirk. Funny, she said, stepping closer. A few minutes ago, you were so sure of yourselves. But now? She tilted her head. You look nervous. Officer Reed shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't as bold as his partner. His hands fidgeted slightly, betraying his fear. Maya turned to the judge. Your Honor, since the charges against me have been dropped, I'd like to present new evidence. Judge Reynolds frowned. What kind of evidence? Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. She handed it to the bailiff, who quickly passed it to the judge. These are internal reports and bodycam footage, she explained. Records of Officer Daniels and Officer Reed falsely arresting multiple individuals over the past 5 years. Most of them people of color, many of them with no criminal history. A stunned silence fell over the room. Judge Reynolds flipped through the documents, his face darkening with each page. The prosecutor leaned over to glance at the contents, his expression quickly shifting from irritation to panic. Daniel's jaw tightened. This is fake. There's no proof. Maya raised an eyebrow. No proof. She nodded toward the large TV screen in the courtroom. Play the footage. The prosecutor hesitated. Miss Carter, I don't think. Maya didn't let him finish. Play it. The judge gave a slow nod. The bailiff pressed a button, and the screen flickered to life. A video played, grainy, but clear enough to see. Daniels and Reed stood over a man in an alley, their voices sharp, their hands rough as they slammed him against a wall. The man pleaded, his voice breaking, but the officers ignored him. The courtroom watched in horrified silence as the footage rolled on, showing arrest after arrest. False reports, excessive force, evidence planted. It was undeniable. Reed's face turned pale. Daniels clenched his fists, his confidence slipping with each passing second. Maya turned to the judge. Your Honor, I request that Officers Daniels and Reed be placed under immediate investigation for misconduct, abuse of power, and falsification of legal documents. Judge Reynolds exhaled sharply. He had no way out of this. "I'll be forwarding this case to Internal Affairs," he announced. "Officers Daniels and Reed, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately, pending further investigation." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniels surged forward. "You can't do this." The bailiff stepped between them. "Stand down." Reed didn't argue. He knew it was over. Daniels, however, glared at Maya, his eyes burning with rage. "You think you won?" he hissed. Maya met his glare without fear. "No," she said simply. "Justice won." As the officers were escorted out, the weight of the moment settled over the courtroom. The judge cleared his throat. "This hearing is adjourned." He stood, his face unreadable, and walked out. Maya turned, gathering her things. She had walked into this courtroom as a defendant. She was walking out as something else entirely. A force to be reckoned with. The prosecutor stopped her at the door. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity and a hint of respect. Maya smiled. "Just someone who knows the law." And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a courtroom forever changed.